One reckless act of compassion was all it took to permanently destroy the quiet, ordinary life Freya Nolan had spent 26 years carefully assembling. She thought she was doing the right thing. She moved through the crowd on pure instinct, completely blind to the terrifying truth that the man she was rushing to save was the most powerful and most feared figure in Western Canada. The string quartet Freya had been hired to anchor was on its third break of the evening, and the Fairmont Pacific Rim's grand ballroom hummed with the particular controlled energy of serious money trying to appear casual. Crystal chandeliers threw warm light across silk-gowned shoulders and the stiff lapels of custom suits. The fundraiser, some hospital expansion in North Van, had drawn everyone from tech founders to provincial cabinet ministers, all of them circling the open bar with the enthusiasm of people who wrote large checks and expected deep gratitude in return. Freya stood near the side corridor with her violin case propped against her calf, nursing a glass of sparkling water she didn't want. She'd taken this gig because the session fee was 3 times her usual rate, and her younger brother Declan had just started his second round of residential treatment at a facility in Kelowna. The bills were not small. The gigs, therefore, had to be. She was watching a couple argue silently near the ice sculpture, the particular frozen smile and rigid jaw that meant something serious was happening behind closed teeth when she noticed the man in the corner. He was seated alone at a private table near the tall windows overlooking Burrard Inlet, separated from the main floor by a low dividing partition, and what appeared to be a deliberate distance that everyone else in the room was maintaining without quite acknowledging. His suit was dark charcoal, precise and expensive in a way that had nothing to do with fashion and everything to do with gravity. He held a glass of red wine, but he wasn't drinking it. He was simply present the way certain people are, like the room had organized itself slightly around him without being told to. Freya noticed him the way you notice a shift in weather. Something tightened at the base of her sternum. Then she noticed the 3 men moving toward him. They came from different directions, from the main entrance, from the bar corridor, from the side hallway, their paths converging with the mechanical synchrony of something rehearsed. They wore fitted dark suits like every other man in the room, but the similarity ended there. The suit jackets sat wrong across the shoulders, not tailored wrong, weighted wrong. Freya had done 2 years of paramedicine training at BCIT before she'd pivoted to music therapy. She'd spent 12 months rotating through Surrey Memorial and Royal Columbian before deciding the clinical world wasn't where she was meant to be. But those 2 years had left something permanent behind, a reflexive, bone-deep reading of human bodies under pressure. She knew the posture of a man preparing for violence. She knew what tension looked like in the neck, the jaw, the hands, the particular way weight shifted onto the balls of the feet before something irreversible happened. The largest of the 3 men, wide across the chest, a pale scar cutting through his right eyebrow, leaned down close to the seated man and said something quiet. The seated man did not look up. He rotated the stem of his wineglass once, slowly between his fingers, and offered what appeared to be a faint smile. The scarred man's face went rigid. The second man shifted his weight, and the movement opened the front of his jacket for a fraction of a second. Freya saw the outline at his ribcage, compact, flat, the unmistakable profile of a concealed handgun in a shoulder holster. Her heart dropped straight through the floor. The string quartet's second violinist, Preet, touched her elbow. "Freya, we're back on in 4 minutes." "I need a minute," Freya said, her voice coming out considerably steadier than it had any right to. She was not brave. She had never thought of herself as brave. She was practical, often stubborn, and occasionally reckless in the particular way of people who grew up with a sick parent and a younger sibling and learned early that no one was coming to fix things except themselves. She scanned the ballroom. The 2 hotel security staff near the main entrance were occupied issue near the coat check, some minor issue near the coat check. No one else had noticed the 3 men boxing in the man by the window. The string quartet's ambient music was too loud. The crowd was too self-absorbed. The windows overlooking the inlet were too far from everything. If that gun came out, the music would keep playing. Freya set down her water glass, smoothed the front of her black performance dress, and walked toward the corner table. She moved with the breezy certainty of someone who absolutely belonged exactly where she was going. She pushed past a small group exchanging business cards, sidestepped a server with a champagne tray, and was 3 steps from the partition when the scarred man's hand began to drift toward his lapel. "There you are," Freya announced, loud enough to turn heads at the 2 nearest tables. She stepped around the partition and placed both hands flat on the edge of the seated man's table, leaning forward like someone who had been searching for 20 minutes and was mildly exasperated about it. "I have been looking for you since the first set ended. You were supposed to come find me at the break." The 3 men went rigid. The seated man looked up. His eyes were a very pale grey, almost silver in the chandelier light, and the expression in them was not confusion. It was the careful, measuring stillness of someone who had encountered an unexpected variable and was rapidly calculating its implications. Up close, he was younger than she'd expected. Mid-30s. Jaw like a fault line. A small, faded scar at the corner of his left brow that matched nothing else in his otherwise composed face. The scarred man spoke. His accent was thick, Georgian, or possibly Ukrainian. "Who are you? Low and dangerous. Walk away now." Freya turned to him with the full, flat expression she reserved for difficult family members at bedsides, the look that meant, "I have more information than you, and you don't have time to push me." "Excuse me, I'm talking to my colleague." She looked back at the seated man. "The donor committee chair has been trying to reach you for 20 minutes. He wants the presentation before 9 o'clock. The seated man held her gaze for exactly 2 seconds. Then something moved in his expression, not warmth, recognition of a decision. He set down his wineglass and rose from his chair, straightening to a height that was considerably more imposing than she'd expected. "Of course," he said. His voice was quiet and low, the kind that didn't need volume to fill a room. A faint accent she couldn't immediately place. "I apologize for the delay." The scarred man stepped into their path. Up close, he was enormous. "You are not going anywhere." "There are cameras on every wall of this building," Freya said, her voice dropping so only the 5 of them could hear, because something in her had stopped panicking and gone very cold and very functional. "And I'm documented on the staff and performer manifest for this event. Whatever you're planning to do here, you are being recorded right now. From multiple angles. Back away." 3 full seconds where no one moved. Then the scarred man's jaw clenched. He took 1 slow step back. The other 2 exchanged a look. Freya looped her hand firmly around the arm of the man beside her and walked, briskly, deliberately, toward the main floor. He matched her pace without a word. They were nearly at the corridor door when she felt the fine tremor running through her own hands, and understood she had been more frightened than she'd allowed herself to notice. She guided him through the side hallway, past the coat check, and through a service passage she'd memorized during the pre-show walkthrough. The hallway smelled of industrial cleaning solution and warm catering equipment. At the far end, a fire door opened onto a narrow lane on the north side of the building. The November air off Barrard Inlet hit like cold water. Freya let the door swing shut behind them and pressed her back against it. She looked at him properly for the first time. He was watching her with that same measuring stillness, standing under the single overhead light of the service lane, hands easy at his sides, completely and utterly unhurried, like he had all the time in the world. Like they had not moments ago been 30 seconds from something catastrophic in a room full of people. "You need to call the police," Freya said, her professional composure snapping back into place over the adrenaline. "Those men are armed. I saw the holster clearly. If they're still in that building—" "They'll be gone," he said. "You can't know that." "I can," he said, "because I know who sent them and what they wanted, and I know they won't escalate inside a document space with 40 witnesses. A pause. That was a statement, not an attempt. Freya stared at him. Then why bring a weapon at all? Insurance, he studied her face. You're not hotel staff. I'm with the quartet violin. She crossed her arms against the cold. Freya Nolan. Knox Farrell. He said the name the way people say things they expect to land, and it did land. Somewhere at the back of her mind, like a key turning in a lock she hadn't known existed. Knox Farrell. She'd seen that name in the Vancouver Sun twice at least. The kind of article you skim and forget because it sits in the difficult intersection of business journalism and organized crime coverage, and you don't have the framework to read what's actually underneath it. She had the framework now. The port terminals, she said slowly. The Farrell Group. Yes, he said simply. Her throat went dry. The Farrell Group controlled 3 of the 5 major private terminal operations at the port of Vancouver. There were articles about federal investigations and missing auditors and labor disputes that had lasted years. There was a name, Farrell, that certain people in certain circles apparently did not say carelessly. I see, Freya said, which was not adequate but was all she had. You were remarkably composed in there, Knox said. He sounded genuinely curious. Most people, when they feel that kind of threat, freeze or make noise that makes everything worse. You read the room and moved. I have paramedicine training, Freya said. You learn to act before you feel ready. Yes. Then, after a pause, the men you interrupted work for a Georgian syndicate. They've been attempting to renegotiate a business agreement through means that are not appropriate for a charity fundraiser. Or any other venue, they will have photographs of you already. External cameras covered the main entrance and this lane. Something cold moved down her spine. Photographs of me doing what? Standing beside me, walking with me, with your hand on my arm. His pale eyes had not left her face. The men who sent them do not make careful distinctions. They will assume a connection that explains your presence. There is no connection, Freya said. I don't know you. You do now, Knox said, and the way he said it was not a threat exactly. But it was not neutral either. It was the tone of someone announcing a new condition of the world. She pulled out her phone. I'll call the police. I'll explain exactly what happened. You can, he said, and then you'll spend the next several weeks as a material witness in an international organized crime investigation, with your name and face publicly associated with mine, which will confirm to Grigor's people precisely what they already believe. Freya looked at her phone screen. She looked back at him. What is it you're asking, she said. I'm asking you to come with me tonight, not because you have no other option, but because the safest place for you right now is somewhere Grigor's network cannot locate you while I handle this situation. He held her gaze steadily. I'm aware of what I'm asking. I'm asking anyway. She should have said no. She knew with complete clarity that the rational decision was to walk back through that fire door, collect her violin case, and call a cab to her apartment in Mount Pleasant. She knew this. She also knew that she had seen a loaded weapon in a room full of civilians, and that the man in front of her had not flinched, had not run, and was looking at her with the kind of precise attention that belonged to someone accustomed to assessing impossible situations very quickly. Where? She asked. A property on Bowen Island, 15 minutes by water taxi, then private transport. No documented connection to my known holdings. Freya looked at the inlet lights reflecting off the dark water and thought about Declan in Kelowna, and about the bills, and about the fact that if something happened to her, her brother would have no one left who knew him the way she did. 48 hours, she said, then I go home. The muscle in Knox's jaw moved. It might have been agreement. The water taxi crossing was fast and cold and nobody spoke. There were 4 of Knox's people she hadn't noticed until they materialized from the darkness outside the Fairmont, impeccably suited, faces controlled, moving around him with the unconscious choreography of long practice. One of them, Bram Tulloch, was introduced to her by name. He was broad and quiet, with the particular stillness of someone trained to assess everything, and react to nothing before the moment demanded it. The property on Bowen Island was not a cottage. It was a glass and cedar structure built into the hillside above the water, dark, modern, and deliberately difficult to see from the water approach. Inside it was warm, a real fire, clean lines, a kitchen that looked genuinely used. Knox moved through it like a man who had spent time here that meant something to him. Freya was given a room and a folded stack of clothes left outside the door, practical and approximately her size, which she did not ask about. She had changed and was sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the grain of the wood floor when she heard it. 3 distinct sounds from the front of the house, then a shout in the hallway, then the deep percussion of the front door slamming hard against the frame. She was in the corridor before she had consciously decided to move. The entrance had become a controlled emergency. Bram Tulloch was down. 2 of Knox's men had him supported between them, and even in the low hallway light Freya could see the wet, dark stain spreading across the left side of Bram's shirt. Too much blood, too fast, at an angle that told her everything she needed to know. One of Knox's men was pressing a folded cloth against the wound, but the pressure was wrong, too central, missing the actual bleed point by nearly 2 centimeters. "Move," Freya said. The man with the cloth looked up at her, startled. "Move," she said again, sharper, and dropped to her knees beside Bram Tulloch on the hardwood floor. Knox appeared behind her, Miss Nolan. "I need strong light. Bring a lamp down from somewhere. I need the first aid kit, everything in it. And I need someone to get me the cleanest towels in this house right now." She was already working with her fingers, reading the wound the way her training had wired her to do. Find the source, stay functional, work the problem in front of you. What happened? "Spot her on the road from the dock," Knox said, crouching close beside her. His voice was controlled. The rest of him was not entirely. "Drive by. 1 shot through the door seal. He's losing arterial pressure. This is a penetrating wound to the left lateral abdomen. He needs surgery. The air ambulance from Vancouver." How long? A pause that lasted too long. 40 minutes minimum. Freya looked at Bram Tulloch's face, ashen, going waxy at the temples, his breathing too fast and too shallow. She looked at the wound. She looked at Knox. "Get me the first aid kit. Get me a knife, sterilized properly, not wiped, and get me the brightest light in this house. You," she pointed at the man who'd been applying pressure, "wash your hands up to the elbow and come back. You're going to be my second pair of hands." Knox held her gaze for 1 full second. "You're a music therapist." "I'm a music therapist with 2 years of paramedicine and a full wilderness first responder certification. Because my instructor at BCIT told me the 2 disciplines were a waste held separately, and I should qualify in both." She pulled on a pair of nitrile gloves from the kit that had appeared at her elbow. "Do you want to debate my credentials right now? Or do you want Bram Tulloch to still be breathing when that ambulance arrives?" Knox rose. He was already moving. "Tell me what to do." For the next 39 minutes, the glass house on Bowen Island became something else entirely. Freya worked in the focused, narrowing quiet that had always come to her in genuine emergencies, the way the extraneous world fell away and left only the problem beneath her hands. She directed Knox with the same tone she had once used with panicking family members at bedsides. Clear, direct, no unnecessary words, no room for ambiguity. He followed every instruction without argument, without ego, without a single wasted movement. She packed the wound with hemostatic gauzes from the wilderness kit. Whoever had assembled that first aid bag had done it for exactly this kind of situation, and she registered that fact and stored it away for later. She controlled the external bleeding, ran 2-liter bags of saline from the kit's secondary compartment, and managed Bram's airway through 2 frightening minutes when his oxygen saturation dropped, and she had to make a decision in the dark with her training and nothing else to anchor her. When the air ambulance set down on the flat section of grass behind the house, Bram Tulloch's vitals were poor, but they were stable and they were moving in the right direction. One of the paramedics took a quick look at what Freya had done and said, "Good management," in the particular tone that means they are genuinely surprised, but are too professional to say so in those words. Freya stripped off the gloves and dropped them in the biohazard bag. Her hands were shaking. She had not let them shake until now. She sat down on the bottom step of the cedar staircase and pressed her palms flat against her thighs and made herself breathe at a normal rate. Knox came to stand in front of her. He had blood on the cuff of his dress shirt, Bram's blood, and he was looking at her with an expression she had not seen on him yet. Not the measuring assessment from the ballroom, not the cold authority in the service lane. Something rawer than either of those, and considerably more careful. He crouched down until he was at her eye level. "You saved his life," Knox said. "He's not clear yet," Freya said. "The surgical team in Vancouver will have real work ahead of them." "He's alive to reach them." Knox was quiet for a moment. "Because of what you did." Freya looked at him. "Your people were shot at tonight because of me, because I walked over to your table." No, his voice was quiet, but he said it like a door closing on that interpretation permanently. "My people were in danger because Grigor sent men to that gala, and because this situation has been building for 8 months, and because none of that has a single thing to do with a violinist who saw something wrong and chose not to look away." A pause. "Don't carry responsibility for what other people's violence does. That weight will bury you." She hadn't expected that. She didn't know what to do with it. "I want to go home," she said, "tomorrow morning." Knox held her gaze. In the low light of the cedar and glass house, with the blood at his cuff and his composure stripped back to something closer to bone, he was considerably more unsettling than he'd been across a charity gala table. "There is still a problem," he said. "Of course there is," Freya said. "The photographs from tonight will have reached Grigor within the hour. The way you approached the table. The way you took my arm. The way you held my gaze when you pulled me out of that room." He chose his words with unusual care. "Grigor is not a man who accommodates ambiguity. He will have already made a determination about who you are to me, and that determination makes you something he can use." "To get to you," Freya said. "Yes." She looked at the fire burning low in the grate across the room. She thought about Declan in Kelowna. She thought about her apartment in Mount Pleasant, with the bathroom tap she'd been meaning to fix for 3 months. She thought about the particular rightness of how her bow had felt in her hand at the start of the first set tonight, before any of this. The only place in her life, she sometimes thought, where everything was precisely what it claimed to be. She thought about Bram Tulloch's breathings, stabilizing under her hands, and the moment his color had started coming back, and the way Knox had followed every instruction without once questioning her authority in the only room where she was the person who knew what needed to be done. "How long until you resolve this?" she said. "A week," Knox said at the outside. She turned to look at him directly. He was close enough that she could see the faint tension at the corner of his jaw and the precise, unwavering attention in those pale grey eyes. Knox Farrell, who controlled port terminals and freight manifests, and apparently the list of who was and wasn't safe inside the city limits of Vancouver. "You owe me 3 weeks of lost gig income," Freya said. Something moved across his face, something close to a smile, though it didn't quite arrive. "Done," Knox said. "And my brother's next 4 months of treatment fees." The almost smile deepened. "Also done." "And you tell me the truth," she said, "about what happens at the end of the week. No managing what I know to make it easier for you." Knox was silent for a moment that felt longer than it was. Outside, through the cedar and glass, the ambulance lights disappeared over the tree line toward Vancouver General. "The truth," he said finally, like it was a currency he didn't spend carelessly, "is that I don't know yet what the end of the week looks like. What I can tell you is that you will be safe, and that what you did tonight, in that ballroom and in this house, is not something I will forget." Freya rose from the step. She went to the kitchen and turned on the kettle, because that was the kind of person she was. The kind who, when the world comes apart at its seams, puts a kettle on and waits for it to boil and thinks about what comes next. Knox stood in the kitchen doorway. He did not leave. And in the careful quiet between them, in the cedar-scented warmth of the house above the inlet, with the water beginning to heat and the fire burning low and the city glowing distantly across the dark water, something settled into place between them, too fragile yet to name, and far too certain to pretend wasn't there. If you held your breath through every second of what Freya did in that hallway on Bowen Island, hit like right now. She walked into that gala to play a string quartet set, and she's walking out of it as something else entirely. Do you think she can return to her quiet life in Mount Pleasant once Knox handles Grigor? Or is it already far too late for that? Tell us what you think in the comments below. Share this story with someone who needs it tonight, and subscribe to Cruel Boss Stories and hit the notification bell so you never miss what happens next.